All right, how do we start?
Well, do you want a story of how I ended up on this stage right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
I volunteered to talk about this topic on a panel because I can talk about anything for 10 minutes with 5 other people.
Yeah, exactly.
And here we are.
Yeah, here we are, and I got called in just because I've got a pretty good experience from my time at Samsung and certainly at Apple with wearables and what the future is going to hold. So appreciate you guys taking the time for us today, and look forward to sharing some insights and hearing your questions and feedback. A lot less formal than a podium speech and a panel. So how's that?
That sounds great. Where's the fire?
Here's the fire. Anybody have one? Come on, that was a joke. Guys,
Fireside chat.
End of the day, fireside chat.
How awake is everybody? Are you wearing a wearable to monitor your heart rate right now?
No.
All right.
That's fair. So where do we start? What do you want to start with?
Well, I think based on your talk earlier about the future is faster than we think.
Yep.
I know I don't look like I'll be turning 50 soon, but 25 years ago I was running the ATM channel for a Midwest regional bank called Huntington in Columbus, Ohio, and I was also a school teacher, and I needed extra money.
Mm-hmm.
And our ATM channel had spools of receipt paper in every single ATM, and every time there was a jam, anybody ever have money at the ATM not come out? Every time there was a jam, you were responsible for calling the bank and telling us. This was before IoT.
Right.
And so I'm running the ATM channel. We're spending millions of dollars a year sending our armored courier service out. And they were bringing the spools of paper back, and my part-time job to make extra money as a teacher was to read through spools of receipt paper to find the missing $10 that didn't come out when you tried to take it out of the ATM. Can you imagine that? 25 years ago?
It's amazing. I mean, we were talking about it earlier today for the guys. If you can't hear me okay, I'll try and speak up a little bit. The progression of what was to what is and what's about to happen is exponentially faster than most people realize. I can tell you in sitting down with meetings and even just talking to individuals here, the stuff you guys have in your hand right now that you probably bought 6 months ago is a relic. Okay, just plan for it. Much like 20 years ago when I was building a restaurant in downtown DC, I had a 1 megabyte digital camera and I thought I was a king. And now my Canon 5D is obsolete. It's amazing what's happened with phones, with wearables, with what's going to happen with projection and how they're going to be used, and what the thought process is that goes behind it. It's not as simple as detecting somebody's heart rate, how bad their golf swing is when they're on a golf course. Like I use one of my wearables for that. But I can only tell you that to adapt to what's about to happen, the technology is going to move so fast. It's going to be like the iPhone and Samsung phones rolling out every year. What is it, S20? Is it i15? What is it that's coming out this year? Because it's just going to change everything. And it's going to change from physical to perhaps implanted within the next 10. So it's coming. All the stuff you saw in movies 5 or 10 years ago, it's coming.
I was telling my colleague who's here about this movie I watched years and years ago with Robin Williams, where there was an implant in our brain that recorded our whole lives. Has anybody seen that?
Mm-hmm.
It was a really bizarre movie. And with that future is faster than we think thing and all of the stuff that I was thinking, reflecting, if anyone's gone over to the CXO 2.0, it's freezing in there, but it's really warm in here.
It is.
And so they don't have IoT with the Nest, with
Right.
the thermostat, like setting us up. So I think maybe one thing that's probably good for the audience is, what does IoT and robotics and wearables really mean? What does it mean to you with your company and how you've built all these amazing stores that I've been obsessively watching on YouTube now? To think about one of the things at one of my previous employers, Acumen Solutions, which is now part of Salesforce, we had a technology that we tried to implement back in the 25 years ago with ATMs, where it would know what ATM you were using, and then we could alert them and say, did you know there's an ATM closer to where you are that isn't a foreign ATM? And we were on that bordering of creepy, like So how many of you thought that us knowing where you were was creepy? And now it's like everybody knows where you are all the time. So what I was thinking about with that journey for you, and when people walk into an Apple store, and if I have an Apple Watch and they know immediately I walked in and what I'm interested in, they can come right over and know I'm there and just start talking to me like they know me.
Sure. And I'll give you two perspectives, because being lucky enough to work for, Apple and Samsung, two very different methods and ways of working about how they go about approaching wearables and how they go about displacing those products in the particular stores. From my team, Angela and Eric and Brian are here today, and they can share some of their insights from our efforts at Samsung. But I can tell you at Apple, as you may have heard in one of the sessions earlier today, a little bit of a different approach to product and displacement in stores. Hey, we got an Apple Watch. Our marketing team has convinced you it's the greatest product ever, and it probably is. Samsung's effort was to put a product into an activity. So you had to associate it to something that you absolutely could not live without. We spent a lot of time just analyzing how I could convince you that that watch that Samsung has is more important than anything in commercial you would ever see from Apple. Simply because we showed you the how. When you go into an Apple store, it can, in some areas, it can be a static display, and you're relying on commercials or feedback that you've seen on the web or on TV to tell you how that watch is used. Samsung, different environment. It's about product and activity. So two different ways of working is what we saw in retail across the board with those two companies.
I love that. I think one of the things that I want to share a little bit about my company and why I was interested in talking to you is what we do is help individuals access flow in the workplace. Has anyone ever heard of flow here? It's like the state of being fully immersed, like you all are right now, in this riveting conversation. And one of the big issues with wearables that I'm even noticing right now is I forgot to put my watch on Do Not Disturb because I wanted to track my level of immersion in our conversation. And it's very distracting. So how many people here, just a show of hands, think you're distracted at least 3 to 5 times at work? How about maybe 10 to 20 times? How about like 64 times an hour? And so here we are. I want to talk a little bit about the balance we need of wearables and robotics actually adding value to our lives at work, and like how maybe the stores you've built helped those employees access flow.
Sure. I can tell you that there are certain customers that we're working and engaging with. One in particular in New York is fully immersed in how your phone and how your watch engages with touchless environments. Is it within a 5-foot span, so the door span opens within 2 or 3 seconds? We call them the Star Trek doors. Is it something where people pass their watch over it, etc., much like Apple Pay does, or things like that? They're exploring different ways of using things in the post-COVID world, like we talked about this morning, so people don't have to physically engage with a particular effort within a constructible building. That's just one particular way. And then obviously you've got there are companies that I know, a good friend of mine and I talk all the time, in logistics and product logistics. You can tell when people are having issues driving a truck down the road with the watch that they're wearing. Get them off to the side of the road and get some sleep. So it's not just about, oh, I need a text or I have an alert on my phone or timer, etc., and all those emails that you get there and Do Not Disturb. They're trying to explore how everything can be used from a watch standpoint. And certainly with goggles, the people in the health section next door, they're talking about how to look at VR and things like that, and how doctor visits are taking place in the future, and certainly in real estate, it's its own little animal.
I love that. I want to talk about the truck driver story because my friend, when the Apple Watch first came out, she was super stressed out at work. And this was when it first came out, and it would say like, your heart rate's high, don't forget to breathe. And she looked down at her watch and was like, I don't effing have time to breathe. And of course her heart rate went up, and in the flow cycle, this is struggle where you're releasing cortisol and adrenaline. And we need to also let our workers get those reminders to take a break, not have a session go right up to 350 and start a new one at 350. So everybody's brain is in a little bit of cognitive load right now. So I'm curious with how you've been working with these locations and different clients and your own experience as a father. I think you shared with me how you leverage technology, IoT, to make our lives, take out the stuff that we don't want to do, and then feel and know when we need to take a break.
Sure. So I'll stem that off into a shameless pitch for the last keynote I have for tomorrow morning over at CXO. We talk about people, and we talk about the age groups of people, and how conversion is playing into wearables and how they're actually used. If you were to ask somebody who was born in 1950, 1955, 1960, 1966, I'm here with wearables, right? I'm trying to figure out whether or not it's something that I can actually run with. If you were to ask my 19-year-old son, absolutely, can I get an Apple Watch? It's the coolest thing ever. I can't live without it. So what we're seeing is by age group, there is a defined conversion by what's being used and what isn't. And no more so as it is in wearables. And I hate to say it that way, but it is true. When you look at the numbers and how conversion is playing in the retail environments, just 5 or 10 years ago, everybody thought that RFID was going to change the world. You were going to have cashierless stores, and you're going to be able to walk in and walk out. Lo and behold, 45% of people like that. Okay? That means 55% of the people aren't going to go to that store for that reason. So there's still a balance that's going to take place over the next however number of years, where people are going to be working towards conversion of product, and not just because of a necessity, but because they've always become used to it. There's still folks like me that are still on the fence and may or may not use an Apple Watch or a Samsung watch, and I've seen all of them. I remember when the first Samsung watch came out, it was half the size of your arm. And that was, 2014, 13? The thing was a monster. It looked like something out of Dick Tracy. And the commercials were phenomenal. But as they got smaller and the tech got better, it certainly became a more viable product. But some people love it. Some people are still here. Yeah.
Well, I think it'll be interesting when you mentioned in your last talk about the aging of the world and healthcare. And so a lot of my other stories on this, another friend of mine who just found out he's in AFib through his watch and now is getting like preemptive medical care. So it was an interesting thing that I associated then to a story of my own when I went skydiving in New Zealand, and I had my watch tracking my heart rate. Anyone want to guess what it was as I'm jumping out?
180.
It was over 200. And it was an interesting thing to track, but like similar with fitness, getting into health. So I'm currently on this 100-day challenge to work out 45 minutes every day, and my watch will remind me. So I'm curious with you, and as you're seeing that aging economy, what you think, we can also delve into robotics and surgery and things that you're seeing that interest you.
Sure. I mean, if you look at, when we go back to the demographics of who we are as people, I mentioned it earlier, some people have never heard this before, but for the first time in history, there are 5 generations in the American workforce, and there's about to be a 6th. It's never happened before. So then as you look at the younger generation being outnumbered by the older generation, by the year 2030, it has a direct impact on the stuff that we're doing in the working zone. So folks that have been used to traditional designs are still going to be working. And those are the guys we still deal with, but they ask the same kind of programmatic questions. Are we doing the right thing? What things should we be doing? And our questions back to our particular clients are simple. Tell us about what you want the environment to be. Rather than saying, let's make the watch work in the environment. Let's talk about your environment. Does a wearable work for it? Is it something else that you should be using? Is it a badge reader, etc.? There are a lot of varied answers that come out from some of our clients currently. Rather than people taking tech and trying to just say, make it fit. There are others that are asking the hard questions. Do we need to make it fit? You know, certainly employee monitoring and things like that are always coming into play. You hear 99% of the time. But I would just say that as you look at the demographic of the groups that we have from the age, it's not going away anytime soon. It's not being converted into full use anytime soon. But you can bet the folks over here next door in health, they're using it. Certainly some of the teachers are using it too. I think the best use case for wearables will continue to be in the medical and education departments, and then certainly personal use.
I love that. I have a friend who's a teacher now, and then my friends with kids, they're taking their phones to school, and I couldn't get my kids to pay attention when there was no phone or computer. And my first student that said to me, I asked her a question, and she said, "Why don't you just Google it?"
Right.
Do I look old enough to go Google what's
Yeah.
Google? So yeah, it's a funny journey that we're on, and one of the interesting things I was hoping to get into with the wearables and robotics, to your point on asking the right questions. I recently hosted a panel on AI, and the speaker, Zach Fink at Aquas Consulting, said, "We can, but should we?"
Right.
And one of the biggest things that we talk about from a flow perspective is clear goals and a collective ambition. And so I'm curious, as you're consulting your store builds and things like this, how do you get them to articulate what they actually want to achieve, to know which pieces fit in?
That's a great question. And we talked about it the other day, and I think we shared a good laugh. And it is kind of a funny story, but I'll share it
Okay.
anyway. And I hope that I know there's one former Samsung employee in the room. Is there any current Samsung employees in the room? Okay. It was a privilege to work at a company that has so many unique divisions. Okay, robotics, cars, clothing, home appliances, mobile, television screens, wearables, tablets, all of these divisions within Samsung. Okay? And I can tell you verbatim, because I sat there. Coming from Apple, we were always asked the question, about working with Apple and how that worked, and they were curious to see how different Apple was from Samsung. But when it came to the different teams working with each other, I'll just give an example. The table here. Okay, I have the Senior Vice President and CEO of Home Electronics, Senior Vice President of Mobile sitting next to him, and she's the Senior Vice President of Wearables. And we're all sitting at the table in Seoul, Korea, in Crystal City, and JY Lee is talking, and the company itself was so fragmented that I was sitting next to Mr. Lee, and I would listen to the gentleman from Home Appliances say, "Can you please tell the person from Wearables that I'll be willing to set up a meeting with her next week?" And I'm looking across, I'm like, who's he talking to? She's sitting right there. Let's just hammer this out. So when I say that Samsung and Apple are two different companies, I flash back to the time in working with Steve, where you left your phone, you left your Mac, you left your notebooks at the door, and you didn't leave the room until it was fully resolved. And you didn't roll anything out unless it was absolutely perfect. So to your point, there are companies that have pillared systems that are difficult to work with. They can't commingle, try as they may. As we found out, when IoT first got rolled out by Samsung, unbelievably gifted people. It was a privilege to work there. But what I found was they couldn't find a way to talk to each other. And the victim of that was guys like myself and Brian and Angela. We were trying to displace products in a world, this world, washers, dryers, etc., TVs, screens, tablets, all of them together in an IoT world. But a true IoT world is interconnected. But I couldn't get the various divisions to talk to each other. So an interconnected IoT world was very hard to translate at Samsung 837, simply because of the pushback we got from the various divisions. Now within other organizations, Microsofts of the world, I've not worked there, Apples of the world, certainly been there, totally different philosophy. So it really is, to answer your question in a long sort of way, it is company-centric of how these particular companies work together and how they solve their problems.
I love that.
Does that make sense?
I think the interesting thing too is they call themselves divisions.
Yes.
Very divided. So in that context, one of the things we love to do at Vive to Flow is this cross organization survey diagnostic to understand how all of the employees are thinking and feeling, and one of the most important things is to take that information and see what innovative and creative ideas your people have. And in this world where technology is changing literally by the second. Like
Yep.
with every data point put into AI, all of when I used to run a fraud department, and the whole rest of the world had gone to chip and pin, but the US. So I'm at this huge fraud conference, and they're talking about all of the IoT of theft, right? So crime is increasing as you sweep people's information off of unprotected Wi-Fi, etc. And we're talking about massive investments in things to protect us on this journey. So as you think about all of that and all of my data flying around in the air, how are you protecting your team, making sure they're able to have continuous learning and time away from their hard work day to like keep up to speed, like come to conferences like this?
I still think it comes down to being old school. I'm not saying it's more efficient, it's just a different way of working. It certainly makes it easier for me because I understand it more. But I would say the collection of data is the one piece that's driving a lot of the eventual solution. Think of, and this is going to sound funny, so bear with me. I ask my wife a question all the time. How the heck does Google know that the traffic here is backed up? How do they put a red little color zone there on that street when I'm not tracking anything and I'm not going somewhere? I don't have my directions in there, but Google darn sure knows that there are 20 cars backed up here waiting. How do they know that? And how do they know that it's green for 300 yards and it's yellow for the next 2 or 3 miles and then red again? How do they know that without pinging your phone specifically constantly? And I reference that because I know when I worked at Samsung, we pinged phones. I can tell you verbatim. I know exactly how they do it, and I know exactly why they do it from the employee standpoint. So the conversion to that is hard data. The city of the future is going to be based upon swarm data. How people live, how they work, how they play, how they move, how they go in their neighborhoods, and the future cities are going to be designed based upon data that's being pinged right now and interpretation through AI. It's coming. You see it in some of the gifted individuals are already talking about how AI data is being used. I would just say it's going to be unbelievable how that data is going to be used in the future. Right now it just seems like, to your point, data is everywhere and they don't know how to filter it and use it. But you can bet that there's some people working on that.
So, I don't know, do you want to take any questions from the audience?
Yes, I talk too much.
What is everybody's biggest IoT wearable or robotics question that you came to this event for? Because everybody knows you're here.
Sure.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at the stuff we had a panel earlier in the day in health on diabetes, and the big revolution was the GLP drugs. But I didn't hear anybody mention, I'd like your perspective on the wearables part of it, where continuous glucose meters have gone from a very small niche with people with type 1 diabetes to the coming thing technologically. How do you see that evolving?
You want it or you want me?
I'll take part of it, you can take the rest.
Okay, you go.
I think it's probably the best use case that's out there. Because it has a use case, again, an activity, associate a product to an activity. So all of a sudden you've got a specific reason to go about this. I think it's brilliant. Why would you not use something that could save somebody's lives? Detect AFib 6 months prior to. Or somebody who has a tendency to have this heart issue or health issue down the road because of their current lifestyle. I personally think that's a great use of technology and data. We live in the United States. Okay, so as you know, whenever you buy a wearable device, you get a little package that's about this thick that tells you all the disclaimers and legal information that goes with it. So as a society in the United States, I think it kind of limits us simply because there's so much to do with attorneys and all the stuff that goes on about your data, and nobody ever reads it. So there's a lot of that going on there, but to your point, the use case of wearables for health is off the chart. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I agree. My comedic response to that would be, I need my watch to tell me when I'm too close proximity to an ice cream store, because my dad had diabetes and he used all of these things to monitor him, so it's a great question.
Yep.
But when anyone has a propensity to those things, it's an amazing tool to use to make sure you're monitoring those things in advance and being proactive. What I would love to say about it too is the premise, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my co-founder, who is a health and wellness consultant, and our goal to help people prevent diseases such as type 2 diabetes or anxiety and depression, or things that lead them into burnout, etc. at work. And so how do we think about, with all of these things, with robotics, with wearables, that we're able to automate the stuff that demotivates people and get them really interested in their role and feeling healthy and well at work, so we can be preventive on all sides of it, right? So if I have a propensity for the glucose issue, wearing that monitor, and if high stress is going to trigger an insulin response, or if it's going to stress me out and put me into an unhealthy situation, much like I prefer to have the dogs do that, the health and wellness dogs that know when you're about to have a insulin coma. But it's a very interesting concept to think about how much more proactive and preventive we can be, not just as individuals, but employers who help the employee know exactly how to get into a healthy state at work.
Sure. I think if you go retroactively back 25 years, I'll get your question just next. I don't know if you guys ever dealt with a company called Buxton's Data Management. They, about 25 years ago, your email, your address, and your name. And they sold me on the product by saying, hey, just give me those 3 things, and we'll tell you everything about you. 2 weeks later, they came back with a book this big. And they told me how I tended to shop, why I was shopping there. They elaborated on all the data they had. Well, now that elaboration is going to take place in less than a millisecond. When you talk about the use of AI and the incorporation of all that data that you are through your phone or your device or wherever, it's going to happen that fast. So how do we use that data?
So for my next date, I need to just call this company and give them the guy's name and email, and I can find out everything I need to know before?
It's scary. Yeah, it's scary. I remember I was blown away, and then now that we're in this tech generation, you can see where it's going.
Yep.
The tech is that much faster. Go ahead, please.
You'll have to put that date off for a week or two to be able to read through it.
Exactly.
I think to me, the bridge I'm hearing that I want to hear more about is the bridge relative to culture, because it's been a sub-theme here a lot. When you talk about Samsung and the liberal divisions and how difficult it is for people to reach across their borders, you're talking about a cultural style that is unique to Asia predominantly. And when I think about the more pressing challenges of aging boomers, yes, what do we do? How can we co-opt wearables and AI and robotics to combat 2 things? One is the tremendous isolation that we are all experiencing as a result of the pandemic in part, and as a result of being device-driven individuals. And 2, given the crisis in care for people who are aging, how can we capture and corral these technologies, not just to give us health monitoring data about our insulin, our AFib, our heart rhythms, our pick one, anyone. What can we do to keep the humanity in our culture going with this technology instead of finding ourselves more and more dissociated from our humanity?
Great question.
I'll go first on this one. One of what I mentioned, I was monitoring something specific on my watch right now. There's an app called Tuesday that monitors your level of immersion and psychological safety in a given moment. So a lot of organizations that manage the culture on the wearable use to help us see how people are feeling in their workday. They also use it for levels of immersion when watching a commercial during the Super Bowl and other many use cases that they could share. But the biggest thing for us at Five to Flow from an understanding of the culture perspective and that remote work and the separation is how can we get back to collaborative teamwork and potentially use some of these tools, what I was mentioning earlier, if robotics and other things can automate the things we don't love, and then the time we get to spend together as humans is more spent with that intellectual
Sure.
conversations and all of that.
The
So,
possibility then would be that by using the data in a different way, that rather than using to colonize people to support toxic workplaces, did I just throw something?
You said it.
I threw something in the punch bowl. We could actually use it if we could get old farts like me to sort of get a little more flexible, to create more customizable workplaces where if you're an introvert and you really do much better collaborating in a different way, once you have the grounding in collaboration, might not, dare I say, the trauma responsivity to the emotional intelligence that needed begins to be measurable and collectible. Is that?
yeah, absolutely. I feel like the individualization of it is a huge thing. Like, we can't make assumptions that a one-size-fits-all for an organization is ever appropriate. And then following a really structured, which you mentioned change earlier in your talk, having a change management around it that's engaging for each individual to make sure that we are working as best as possible as groups, and also allowing that autonomy for people to work when and how they best work. So part of what we were thinking about from a robotics and IoT perspective also is thinking about how we don't have the adverse effect or the collateral damage to some employees when we're doing these other things and engaging them in that. But I wanted to leave time for you on that too.
I think you're spot on, and I would say I'm privileged enough to have worked in, we'll just say every country in the world. I've built something somewhere, with the exception of Cuba, and I can tell you that I've built a site in North Korea. So when I say I love your question, I love how you phrased it in the Asian culture, because the American culture is unlike any other culture on the planet. So I could say that how the folks in Tokyo relate to their coworkers is extremely different than those in San Francisco and New York, than London, than Berlin, than Moscow, than Stockholm, and then Oslo, etc. So I would say that, to your point, if it relates to the data and the ecosystem within that work environment in that demographic, how do we make that more efficient? So we understand these people are this way, and this is what's best for them according to the data that we maintain? Absolutely. Is it different here in the States? Absolutely. But I would still say it needs to be centric to its demographic location, rather than just a one-size-fits-all. That would be my thought.
And one thing I'd love to add to that in regard to efficiency is, in my many years of change management, is if I said, we're doing this for you to be more efficient, and everybody else hears, oh, somebody's losing their job because he's gonna do more with less. So the goal with a true change management is to tell you, what are you gonna do with this newfound time that you didn't have? So when you were inefficient and we're helping you be more efficient, you can now spend time on the stuff you love, more strategic conversations, going to conferences, working on your own professional development. And so we have to really work on that change message of, all this technology isn't coming here to replace you. We have to make sure we're really conscious of, we're helping you get home earlier to your wife and kids. We're helping you have a less stressful day at work. We're helping you actually spend 5 more minutes with that patient who really needs that. I saw a question back there.
Yeah, you just mentioned the smart cities. So yeah, this whole concept of the smart city, this interconnected city that watches energy consumption, transport issues, like communication stuff, all is organized around Internet of Things and then the wearables. So I was wondering, what's your vision about the future of smart cities, and what are the issues that we should face and that we should talk about right now about these smart cities?
Sure, great question. And certainly, again, shameless spiel. We do have the presentation tomorrow where we show a little bit of that, and then I showed what the city of the future could look like. But again, it's based upon data that people want. You know, is it predictive swarming so we can manage traffic flow? Is it about some sort of next version of Uber? Obviously electric cars, etc., that comes into play, more green, more efficient, etc. But the question then becomes is, how do you change Los Angeles from Los Angeles? Do you do it in sections? Do you do it in neighborhoods? Do you do it in boroughs? How do you change New York? I mean, obviously that's an extremely tough question. I would say based upon my time in China, in Chengdu, Shanghai, etc., and I know this is gonna sound really funny, but I literally drove by a city that was completely closed off that was being built. So I can tell you verbatim, when you drive by and I say, what is that? And they said, that's a new city that's being built. I said, great, who lives there? Nobody. They were just building the city to house 6 to 8 million people sometime in the future. Is that something we could do in the States? I don't know. But is it something that we know that what we're currently going through isn't sustainable? Okay, we know that if you drive in Manhattan, I don't like driving in Manhattan, you look up in Boston, all the old streets, it isn't a sustainable living environment. So how we're gonna go about it, block by block, street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, is it gonna happen in our generation? Possibly. Will it happen in our children's generation? Definitely, because it has to. It has to.